Richard Kemp was the commander of British forces in Afghanistan in 2003. He joins me now live from London. Listening to that story, looking at those pictures, what do you think went wrong?
Well, clearly it's a very terrible tragedy, and it appears that a number of very serious mistakes were made. I think what one has to bear in mind here is that all warfare, all combat is confusing and chaotic, and information is often wrong and often misassessed. I think when you add to that the fact that the Germans are very, very inexperienced in war, in all forms of war since 1945, and in particular in Afghanistan, where they've seen very little combat, I think you have to that contributes certainly to what happened. Okay. One of the other problems I think that you can look at is the fact that the Germans have very severe restrictions on ground operations for their forces after dark, and perhaps that led them to want to deal with it from the air rather than with troops on the ground.
Okay, I can imagine that there's so much confusion, nobody really knows what's happening most of the time, there's a lot of fear about your own responsibility. But when you've got the pilots saying we can clearly see people, we could see it in that video, you could clearly see people around those trucks, couldn't they have said, no, we're not going to do this?
Well, I think the American pilots work very closely to the instructions of the commanders on the ground, and the American pilots, as I understand it, were being told by the German ground commanders that there was an imminent threat, that there was a threat of attack on the German base, and also that German troops on the ground were in contact with the Taliban, and that was why they justified that air attack. And the American pilots have very little choice other than to believe what's being said to them by the ground commanders and support it. And I think NATO is very fortunate in having air pilots who will work in that way, but there must be that bond of trust, and I'm sure that this incident will have undermined to an extent that trust.
But that must highlight some of the problems working under the NATO banner. You've got so many different countries who operate under different orders all coming together. That's quite a toxic cocktail,
that's
isn't
right.
it?
It's very difficult. Coalition operations are always very complicated, but procedures and rules are set out clearly enough so that this kind of thing should, in most cases, be avoided. The other factor we shouldn't forget about is the fact that, I mean, this tragedy has happened. NATO is in many ways tearing itself apart and investigating it, and the German government, I've no doubt, will deal with it very thoroughly, and I've no doubt if there is sort of culpability, then the people concerned will be disciplined or removed. But what we mustn't forget is that this kind of incident is the bread and butter of the Taliban. They try to encourage NATO forces to attack the civilian population. They hide behind the civilian population. They're desperate to bring this kind of incident onto their own people, and it obviously helps them in their propaganda war. And I don't know, I mean, I really don't know in this case whether that was a factor, whether in fact the Taliban's actions in forcing the villagers out to the tanker, thinking that it might be attacked, played a part in this.
Interestingly enough, it came out in David's report there that this attack followed documentation stating that we cannot attack civilians because this will backfire, as that clearly has. What do you think this means now for the future rules of engagement?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. General McChrystal, the commander in Afghanistan, has made his rules of engagement absolutely clear, and there's no doubt within the last 6 months to a year, those rules have changed, and it is now it's not possible normally to carry out a lethal attack unless there is imminent danger to NATO forces or Afghan civilians or government. And I think that those rules stand. It appears in this case not that the rules of engagement were wrong, but that certainly from the information that I've seen that they weren't adhered to.
Richard Kemp, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.